Just like to welcome everyone to this evening's presentation at the BCS, which we're now the Service Management and ITAM group, following our merger that happened at the back end of last year with the Service Management group. And that's why we have renamed our group, for those of you who may not have caught up with the news. I'm Marilyn, but the Vice Chair, for those of you who have not recognised who I am. This evening we have got a presentation from Louise, and I'm just going to go through a couple of slides, then I'll introduce Louise and we'll hand over to Louise to do this evening's presentation, and then we'll take some questions. Please feel free to type questions into the chat box as we go along, and I will gather them and hand them over to Louise at the end. And we may even be opening up the chat, the audience to introduce, to allow questions, but I'd need you to just put your name in the chat window and that you have a question, and then I will allow you to unmute so that we can, or call you forward to unmute so you can ask a question if you haven't written it into the chat window. So that's the format for this evening. Cool. So we are kicking off now at 6 o'clock as planned in the invitation that you would have received or that you've responded to. And like I said, our presentation tonight is from Louise Green, who is from Civica, and the presentation title tonight is Jumping the Fence, Making the Move from SAM Manager to External SAM Consultant. We'll be walking through the presentation for about 40 to 45 minutes, and then there'll be 15 to 20 minutes of questioning before we close at 7 p.m. this evening. Oops, sorry. So a couple of dates for your diary. Can I just check, is the right slide coming up there, Kylie, or?
It is, but you don't have full screen mode on, so we can see all the slides.
Okay, it's just I've got full screen in my view, and it's in the sharing window it's not there. So okay, let me just check what's happening there.
And you're on the very first slide, not the agenda slide.
Okay, so that's not what's happening. I'm just going to stop and start sharing again.
Do you have two screens? That might be a problem.
No, I don't have two screens.
It's not reacting well to my two screens.
Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing again and just start again.
PowerPoint gremlins are out tonight, aren't they?
I'm actually just going to share my screen. Just let me know if this one works better. And I go to full screen now. Is that better?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're on slide 4 at the moment.
Thanks. Yep, that's cool. That's not where I want to be. Okay, it's slide 3. So thank you. Good. We're good to go. Okay, so a couple of dates for your diary are the things that we've got coming up this year. Obviously, tonight we've got Louise, which is what you're all here to hear this evening. And then another event that we've got coming up, which will be the 6th of October. It's our annual conference, which is normally held face-to-face in the BCS offices. And it's very, very unlikely that that's going to happen this year because, indoor events of gatherings are currently not allowed and unlikely to be allowed at that time of year. So we're planning to move this to an online conference for that day, and we're still gathering all of the speakers and pulling the whole schedule together. So there'll be more information coming out for you all as we go through the next few weeks. Certainly, we're open to anybody who would like to come and present for us on any of our topics. We generally have topics, obviously we're including this service management group now. We generally cover topics and we're still working out the streams, but certainly there's always software asset management. There's topics around configuration management, DevOps, release management, and topics that cover anything around transformation. The theme of our conference this year is going to be focused on, and I actually didn't have the words here, I should have put a slide together. It's going to be focusing on what we've learned through this year in transitioning businesses the way we do businesses, have we taken forward what we've learned into our future way of working, or are we regressing back to the older ways of working once we've changed our mode out of lockdown and carried on with our business for the rest of the year? So just really going to try and look at what other businesses are doing around that sort of stuff and what the impact it's having on everyone's business and generating some conversation around that. And the final event that we run generally in the year is our November AGM meeting, where we have opportunities if people would like to volunteer to become part of our committee and sit on the board with us and help putting all of these meetings together throughout the year. So if you would like to get involved, you can take a copy of this screen here and contact Kylie Fowler. And Kylie can also have you added to our email distribution list so you can have event notifications like this one we're having this evening, and further information about the rest of the year's events as well. And you can also join our BCS LinkedIn group as well. So tonight we have Louise Green, who is presenting. Oh gosh, did that just drop for all of you? It did. Sorry. Start that again. Tonight we have Louise Green, who is, oh gosh, sorry, I'm having problems with my screen presentation here. Louise Green, who's presenting to us tonight from Civica. Louise has been in IT for over 15 years, having worked internally for businesses as a software asset management specialist. She specializes in developing internal SAM process and governance, driving software compliance, optimization, contract renewals, and assisting in design and licensing of large IT projects. Having spent all of her SAM career in end user environments, she's recently moved to a SAM consultancy. And that's what she's going to be talking to us about tonight, jumping the fence and moving from SAM. Sorry, I just can't see my screen. Moving from SAM at BCS to an external consultancy company. She has a varied career in software and contract management and has made the big decision to move from SAM to SAM Consulting for Civica. And we will just hear from Louise tonight when she goes through this story and what that all the impacts in relation to that. So I'm just going to hand over presentation now to Louise.
Hello, everyone.
Louise, you're the presenter.
I'm hoping that the slides work. Okay, we will see whether or not we can get this working.
So I just presented full screen, but moving the control panel was what dropped the slides off my view just there a few times.
Yeah, that's fine, don't worry. I think it's going to go into this way. It's still not doing full screen for me. There we go. Hopefully this is showing.
It is showing the whole PowerPoint presentation. Oh, there we go.
Is that now showing correct? There we go.
It's actually gone into slide view, yes.
Yeah, we will. It's not letting me. So, hello everyone. A little bit about me and how I got into SAM. So, many moons ago, I went into IT as a service desk analyst in 2005. It was for a local council, and I stayed with them a number of years and then moved on to working as a service desk analyst for an engineering firm. While I was at that engineering firm, they offered me the position of software librarian, and I do say that with inverted commas, air quotes, which was literally being a librarian of disks in a cupboard, which was a task and a half because the company was quite large and they were wanting to bring all their software centrally. And it was in that time that I was with them that I came to the realization that they were wanting the same disk booking out for more than one install, and I pointed it out and they said, oh well, why don't you become our software compliance specialist? So that was how I made the leap into SAM, and then I became a senior with them in 2011. And in the time that I was there was no SAM tooling at all. There wasn't any real look at SAM. They'd had a number of external vendor audits, as most companies of certain sizes always do, but they hadn't really invested in it, so it'd just been an internal thing that I'd pointed out, and suddenly I was landed with the SAM role. So I implemented Centennial, which at the time was the market leader of SAM tooling. Got that populated, also started to do divestitures of companies in that time, so starting to look at the contracts and transfers of licenses, what you can and can't do with certain products. And upon me realising I needed to move on, because there wasn't much more from a professional development viewpoint there, we were looking at Snow as the Centennial replacement. Centennial was no longer being developed by Front Range at the time, so that was my leap out. I had at this point thought, hang on, is software asset management really where I want to be? So my leap out of there was to become a project coordinator. I thought, sure, I wouldn't mind being a project manager. So if anyone looks at my LinkedIn, that is why I come up as a project coordinator for a company for 6 months. Quickly realised that wasn't my forte, and a role came up for a food manufacturing company, and I went to there. My first task with them will have been, they were an outsourced IT, but they'd only been outsourced for 2 of a 5-year contract, and it wasn't working for either the outsourcers or the company I was working for. So my first job was to manage the contracts back into house and set up an internal IT team. So it wasn't necessarily SAM in its purest form at first. It was everything around how an IT team functions and how you get IT back in-house. So that was standing up new data centers, managing licenses back in from the likes of IBM, where there'd been contracts signed where you can't move them back in-house within 3 years of moving them out to an outsourcer, ensuring that all of the contracts were listing the manufacturing company as the owning company, and that there was no longer a reference to the external support company. Once we did that, which I did ask how long I had, because normally that's an 18-month project and I was the sole one working on it, they needed it done within 6 months. So that was my first task, and we insourced within 6.5 months. So that was my first achievement for them, at which the next step was then looking at the broader licensing. At the point in time, they were part of a larger parent company, and the IT was split between the parent company and the manufacturing company I was working for. So it was understanding at what level were licenses allowed to be used, etc., and where the splits of ownership could sit and remain. So they wanted them to be separate entities for future potential divestitures or acquisitions. So that was my next step, and then we quickly realised that there was a need for a SAM tool, and it, as I was the only person internally doing this and there wasn't a team of them, we looked to take on an external SAM provider, and it did get passed out to a SAM provider where we provided all the license information. We did all of the internal process and governance to ensure that it was all being looked after, but we leaned upon that external SAM provider for extra assistance and effectively hosting the SAM tool set. And then I left there in January of 2017 and joined a broadcasting company where I remained for 3 years, where there was 2 sides to the business, one that's managed by an outsourcer and one that isn't. And they were looking for an internal SAM to effectively service assure the SAM provision by the outsourcer, and looking after the SAM for the non-managed side of the business that wasn't being managed by the outsourcer. So it is being managed internally, but not managed by the outsourcer, if that makes any sense. So it was a large organisation, 60,000 plus seats at Burst, and the managed side was approximately 30,000 devices, virtual and physical. So it was a large project to undertake as a sole SAM, and I was on my own there until the December of the 2017, where we actually increased our SAM team. And part of the role there was bringing in line the process and governance and policies to ensure that the outsourcer was delivering what the business needed, and that they could be measured against it. And what else? And that was it. And bringing in a SAM tool, moving away from an old legacy SAM tool into a new SAM tooling, and getting that up to speed and fit for purpose to ensure that it had quick resolution times for any staff member requesting software, and ensuring the best value for the company moving forward. And then it was 3 years with them. I decided, is this where I want to stay? I've never really looked at being an auditor for vendors. It's not really where I sit. My drive has always been to look after the companies that I'm working for. But when you're an internal SAM, it's not something that businesses always want. So it was either, do I go and find something a little bit closer to home, because that role was quite a lot of travel for me, and the role at Civica came up, and so I decided to take the leap. So that's how I got to where I'm at. The next one is, why did I pick SAM? I think I've alluded to the fact that it wasn't something I picked. It actually picked me. But it wasn't something that I actually looked to do from the first instance. I was actually wanting to be a police officer, and went off to university, did a criminology and sociology degree, came back home, started temping for a local council, and a role in IT came, and that was it. My career in IT began through purely just wanting to remain in my hometown for a little bit longer. Why SAM from a business perspective? Most businesses don't actually understand what a SAM can do, but they believe they need one. It's usually off the back of an audit or license review. Some know that it can control spend and believe that SAM can do it, which we all know we can do. But it can be somewhat thankless from all perspectives. It's one of those ones that, and it happened to me when I was with a food manufacturing company, that once they think they've got control over it, the question is, do we really need an internal SAM anymore? And that company made me redundant because everything was set up and running. So it kind of became a bit of a, catch-22. So, we as SAMs can do so much and we do so much that it makes us unsung heroes within a business. We don't often come out and say what we are or aren't doing, as long as everything's ticking over and there's no huge shortfalls being identified. We're just sat plodding away, especially if you've got the business to follow your processes. Literally, it's just a tick in the box and ensuring you're doing the auditing of the processes, and you are there just assuring the service internally. But we need to show businesses what we can do. So you need to put yourself out there and show that you've got the ability to interpret contracts. I have been in roles where contracts have been not necessarily provided to me, and I've been asked explicitly why I would need them. And we need to be able to interpret those, especially with identifying technical implications of such contracts. So usually contracts are signed by our procurement teams, with maybe someone from IT, maybe your head of IT or a director that said, yeah, that's what my technical guys have told me that we need. But actually, when you get into the finer detail of the technical contract, it states certain things that your technical team can't abide by explicitly, and you cause problems. So from a SAM viewpoint, it's always good to have that element of understanding what certain clauses may have an impact on from a technical perspective. We also need to understand the business priorities, OPEX or CAPEX led. Obviously, software used to be very much capitalized by businesses because it was something they could class as an asset. As software vendors are moving more and more into the cloud, it's pushing it to OPEX spend. From a finance perspective, some staff, if they can push that and explain the difference between the OPEX and CAPEX and actually explain it explicitly to the technical teams, the IT director and the finance teams around how much something will cost over 5 years, it normally assists them in making a decision. Even if they're being OPEX driven, they may decide to go down the CAPEX route for certain products, especially if they haven't got quick turnarounds on their upgrade systems, that perhaps they like to sweat their assets long term. We also need to have our good technical understanding of all platforms. We seem to become jack of all trades and try and master all of them at the same time. So traditional hardware setups and software installations, I think that's our bread and butter and has been for many years. But the advent of SaaS, PaaS and IaaS has meant that we've had to begin looking at what implications that has internally to the business that we work for, especially where some of those products, such as, I'm trying to think of one, Slack allows an installation without admin rights, which used to be our gold standard for ensuring that things couldn't get onto the network without someone agreeing to it. So we've got to be able to understand them and explain that back to our technical teams, service desk and higher up the chain if there's ever an issue brought. I do find that every SAM I've met is a dog with a bone when it comes to the detail in everything else. And it would go without saying that we all need to understand licensing and the fact that licensing changes, especially Microsoft's updated product use rights that come out every couple of months, which means that what you understood last week might be completely different next week, but it's good for us to be able to show that internally to the business as to why there is a requirement for SAM. So as long as we as professionals are able to stake our claim and stand up and show the business what we can do, and not just, oh, you've got a nice spreadsheet that tells me I'm compliant, or you may have put them into a chart and said, you know, you've got a 3% non-compliance across the entire state, because that can be driven through a SAM tool. What we as SAMs need to do is prove to the business where else we add value that perhaps they didn't realise that we were picking up on, and hence the thankless task or unsung hero, because all of them can drive control on spend and potential cost avoidances from audits in the future. Let's see for my next slide. So my experience as an internal SAM, I've had some really, really great experiences. I've been able to get involved in some huge projects. The broadcasting one, when I joined them as a company in 2017, they were in the middle of migrating, tendering their outsourced contract and awarding it. So it wasn't just jumping in and picking up where someone else had left off. It was jumping in and shaping the SAM service moving forward under a new outsourced contract. Very much like that with the food manufacturing company. Huge piece of work there for bringing insourcing in and helping set up the IT team. But it seems to be a recurrent theme where I have been that it not necessarily have the exec buy-in. It's not where you expect it to be. So I found through experience that the head of IT has said, I need a SAM and someone that can get our licensing sorted, has been able to go up to their director or chief information officer and say, I need the additional spend for an additional staff member to bring SAM in, but hasn't explained what the SAM will do and what the remit of the SAM is. So therefore you come in expecting to be able to just get running with SAM, and it doesn't always happen. You end up being in a situation where you're putting in front of them processes and governance that they say, well, that'll never work. And then you're having to work around it, and you ask, well, yeah, where's the drive from above? Oh, well, don't worry, they've signed off having you. and then that's it. It seems to be a recurrent theme. There's been a couple of companies I've worked for where I've actually got to sit with the exec board and explain, and normally that drives it through, which means that I don't have the internal arguments with technical guys saying, but I've always done it this way, which seems to be another one. There is definitely an internal change to ways of working, and there is a hearts and minds task to go. So those internal technical staff, if you can get them on board and have them understand the implications of going to something like the Volume Licensing Service Centre and downloading any product that is available and what impact that has. You need to, I found that winning them round and explaining that it isn't me as the internal police officer doing the job, it's actually Microsoft rules. And unfortunately, I always make the vendors out to be the bad guys. I find it works quite well, where it's literally I'm saying I'm just trying to make sure that we don't get in trouble. But it is, a lot of SAMs that I've spoken to, and as my experience is that pushing that internal change, driving, effectively ways of working in a completely different direction than allowing just technical staff to go off and fix it and there is no consequence, has been quite a large part of my task as a SAM. I found that off the back of that, education is needed not only with your internal IT teams, but also across the board. So you find when you start looking at implementing SAM tools, some people think you're snooping because you're seeing what's on their machine, especially when you drop them an email to say, we notice you have Rollercoaster Tycoon installed, could you please uninstall it because it's against policy? And they're like, well, how do you know I have it and why are you snooping on me? That's another flip back to the hearts and minds task, but also you need to illustrate where the process has failed internally, because you will get asked questions. And I found that I was getting asked questions by my manager saying, well, how's it got to this point? What were you not doing? And sometimes you have to explain it's not something that me as a SAM was not doing, it's just putting out a acceptable use policy when someone logs on that they don't read, and that is your only way of managing them, is not necessarily going to be adhered to once that staff member's been with you 8-9 years and they've never been questioned on something that's been installed for the last 7. So it's, I found that often happens. And yeah, implementing a fully functioning SAM tool can take some time. A lot of staff, including myself when I first became a SAM, thought that you just put the SAM tool in and it does everything for you. My experience was that buying a SAM tool, nice and quick if you can get it through the tender process and pick and pay for it, then the hard work begins, not for the putting in your licensing, but actually getting the data back from the business, much like the snooping point that I made on the last comment. Getting the agent out to the business can cause some discussions, and it seems to reflect internal politics. One team saying, but no, that might have an impact on how this server operates, and it's a 24-hour server, 24-hour business priority server. We can't take the risk of taking another agent on there. It's already got a antivirus and encryption and SCCM and anything else. Can cause problems. Also, in a company where you have group IT, but all the separate companies operate slightly outside of that, and group IT are meant to keep over the governance, the internal politics of having group IT put something out into the business that effectively makes them more visible as to where things might not have been done correctly. And then the business doesn't see it as a priority. They believe that having someone like ourselves, SAM managers, doing the job can get rid of the need for a SAM tool, not understanding that that's not an easy task. If you were to say, right, I just need to pull everything that's ever been installed through every potential tool set we have, such as SCCM, and then painstakingly going through lines, I think that has been one of the more difficult conversations I've had with a couple of companies, is saying it can be done, but it's not a one-person job, and it's always a point in time. So I'll take a snapshot on the 1st of January and you probably won't get a Microsoft server ELP until September, because I'll have to cleanse it all and make sure it's correct. But I have found that as an internal SAM, promoting the wins of a SAM has helped keep my relevance within a business. They've often, SAM loses its relevance once the first big win's done and it's all ticking over, as I mentioned before. So I found that as an internal SAM, promoting those little wins, so where you've been able to reduce a contract renewal, or where you've been able to reharvest licenses and get that into some sort of semblance of normality for your service desk staff to go through, and ensure that we're not actually buying more licenses, keeps SAM relevant to the business, whilst it might not be huge amounts of money. It just keeps it ticking along, and it means that moving forward the business will keep going with the SAM processes, which then leads on to why my move to consultancy. Oh gosh, why move to consultancy? So my reasons for moving into consultancy was I've done internal SAM for a number of years, and I wanted a slightly different challenge. So I came across the opportunity with Civica and took it. And some of the reasons for that is that if, as a consultant, the businesses you're dealing with have already had the internal discussions around outsourcing SAM and why the business needs it. So I'm not having to do the hearts and minds discussions. I'm there to provide them with a service. It also assists with the buy-in moving forward with the SAM program. So anything that I put forward from could you provide me this data? They've already committed to spend with the outsourcing company, and I'm there to assist them getting what they need through that product. I'm also able to help more than one company. As an internal SAM, you're dealing with the company you work for, whereas with Civica, I've got a number of companies I help with, and it means that it's varied, so every day is different. I'm getting asked different questions. I'm also very much less involved in the internal politics of each company. I've got the collective knowledge of other SAMs, so internal SAMs can feel somewhat alone, especially if it's a one SAM team. I say team, what I mean is you are the sole SAM, whereas in the consultancy you have a number of other SAM consultants. So I'm able to lean on others for knowledge that perhaps I don't have. I've never professed to knowing everything, but it means that I can go and ask a team member about Sophos. It was never, it wasn't something I had to deal with previously. Go and ask them. They're like, no, I've got that. Here's the information. Whereas previously I'd have had to look to software resellers to get that information, or start trawling the internet and hope that I come across the right thing. Also, with a larger group of customers, we have the ability to quickly identify vendor audit trends. It wasn't something I'd ever, previously looked at as an internal SAM. I'd look at, ITAM review and all of the newsletters that are out there to see whether or not anyone had noticed, that Micro Focus were coming out, or that, Microsoft were deciding to audit. Whereas, because I work for a consultancy, if we have any customers that come in and say, hang on, we've had this request, and then another one, we're able to pick up quite quickly whether or not there is any audit trends happening. And effectively, it's giving me professional and personal development. It was the next step in my career. It's given me more confidence to talk. So yeah, that was why I moved to consultancy. I'm hoping that's just ticked over. No, it hasn't. There we go. What have I learned in the move? And what's been the challenges? Well, in consultancy, it's a very defined scope of parameters to work in. So, and hang on, sorry, lost my way. Yeah, it's a very defined way of working. Whereas when you're an internal SAM, it's quite wide ranging, and the remit can have scope creep in itself. Suddenly you may be asked to look at TV licensing. I don't think that is a SAM role, never have done. Anything with a plug on it seemed to be anything that was chucked my way previously, whereas under consultancy, you definitively know what you're delivering to or what's been requested of you. But I have noticed that both internal and outsourced SAM come across the same blockers. So delays in deployment, that's probably because internal conversations are happening about what the agent does, how much power it takes up, will it slow down performance, lack of understanding. So where we all know what a license may be and what problems that can cause for a business, there's a lack of understanding within the business that's wanting SAM, and it can be still classed as a low priority. Once they're into something, they might just go, right, okay, it's running, if we need it, it's there. As listed in the previous slide, there's a wider ranging set of experience to pull on. Internal SAM is often a one-man band or a single point of failure, and that can weigh on you from a responsibility viewpoint as an internal SAM. I know I personally felt worried that if something was found amiss anywhere that I've worked, that it would be instantly said, oh, well, you're the SAM, why is it not resolved? Even if it was picked up on a risk register or anything like that. Whereas within a consultancy, that the role is consultative and providing advice, and therefore that weight isn't sat upon me. And yeah, the reason why I have moved, I'm thinking I'm on time, someone might be able to jump in, is professional and personal development. And my honest opinion is that there's some very good matches between the two roles, but very different ways of working, which has opened my eyes somewhat. Thank you, everyone. Has anyone got any questions? I suppose that's the next bit.
Yeah, I've got a question here for you in the chat window, Louise, from Vaughan Chadwick,
Okay.
who he asks, how do you find obtaining proof of license data from vendors and how has it changed? And with MSFT and MLS is so incomplete these days that I now need to combine multiple data from them, which is not that easy as it used to be.
Right, okay, so the first question was, sorry, that was a two-parter, wasn't it? I'll tackle the second one because it's actually something I've come across recently about Microsoft and the MLS data. So internally to a business as a SAM, it was kind of one of those ones that you didn't want to go and ask for an MLS. Purely because it used to be seen as, oh, well, if a company is asking for an MLS, what are they wanting that data for? It's not so much these days. A lot of people want that data because they have their SAM tooling and they just want to keep it up to date. But from a consultancy viewpoint, I don't actually request the MLS data, but it's given to a request on behalf of the company following a letter of authority is requested from Microsoft and provided back to Civica for me to work on. However, I have noticed that the MLS data from Microsoft is somewhat incomplete. So before I even start on working on an effective license position, I'm finding that I'm having to drag through and ensure that the previous years we haven't missed any. Legal entities is the first one, because that's normally where they're falling down in the first instance, is that they haven't listed all the legal entities for the company. So it is all very manual. I'll agree with you, Vaughan, that it is. And then, yes, literally chucking it back at the Microsoft SAM team for providing the MLS data, because off the back of that, I have found that the numbers don't match. So if you go through the transaction data, it doesn't match the data that's on the front end MLS for license summary. And it's been picked up widely. It's not just something that you've noticed, Vaughan, and we are actually questioning that internally of Microsoft as to why suddenly the MLSs aren't necessarily as accurate as they used to be. So I'm sorry I don't actually have an answer for you, but it has been noted, and it's something that we're picking up with them, but I'm gathering everyone that sees it needs to pick it up with Microsoft to try and force them to get that right. And what was the first question that Vaughan asked?
The first
Marilyn?
part of that question was, how do you find obtaining the proof of license data from vendors and how has it changed?
Okay, so I think I alluded to it a little bit in the first answer, but when I was an internal SAM, I was very careful about pulling proof of entitlement from vendors. I would normally start off with checking that I could prove all, or if not the majority, before I would actually go and approach the vendor for it. And literally, normally I would approach the vendor via our resellers for that certain product. So it wasn't a direct contact, it gave us a bit of a buffer. Within Civica, it is letter authority from the companies that we're working for and on behalf, which then goes to Microsoft to provide that data, or any other vendor back. Sometimes, depending on where we're pulling that data from, as in if the companies have multinational arms, then you're having to then go through jumping hoops effectively to ensure that you get letter authority for each individual reseller, not reseller, arm of the vendor. So I'll just pick VMware as an option. VMware Europe will provide us European enterprise agreement numbers and the licenses that sit under them for the companies that we're requesting. But if you're dealing with a company that also has an Indian arm, we then have to approach VMware India, or at least provide VMware UK with the agreement numbers so that they can then get that data from VMware India. It is slightly more complex, especially when you don't know the inner workings of the business that you're providing SAM services to. So, I've only got the data that I'm provided to work from, and then it's a lot of questions and answering. But when you're an internal SAM, you know where your businesses sit. You may have an idea of what agreements you have in which country and what licenses sit on them, so you know what questions to ask when you're requesting that proof of entitlement. But it's the same but different. It's a very odd one, but it's definitely more arm's length when you're internal, because you're trying to protect the business that you're working from any unwanted scrutiny from the vendors. So I always approach the resellers. So you build relationships with your resellers, and you say, right, okay, we need this to be able to put it into our new SAM tool, or for us to verify what we've got. And normally because they hold that relationship with the actual software vendor, it makes that transaction a little bit easier. I hope that answers it.
Okay, we'll get a follow-up if it doesn't. So next question I've got here, I've got a couple more coming up. So one from Bob Ray, and Bob asks, how do you find how convenient it is to confirm compliance if, say, Microsoft request proof, and how quickly are you finding the results once the agent has been installed?
Right, okay, so I'll be quite honest. So from a consultancy viewpoint, I haven't been with Civica at a point that they've implemented the agent for any of the companies that I'm dealing with, because obviously there's a number of SAM consultants. They are in the taking on other customers, but the customers that they've had it deployed for a number of years. But data back from those agents within the tool set that we utilize and other tool sets is usually within the day. So you'll be able to see the install data, and that's with all SAM tools. Am I going off track, Marilyn?
No, that's right.
No. That's fine. So within the tool set, it usually comes back, is back into the data, into the SAM tool within a day, but it is only install data. When we're looking at compliance data, that is a whole different story, be it internal or external. You have to ensure that you have the right licenses uploaded into your SAM tool set for it to then work out the compliance. Also, a SAM tool isn't a silver bullet. You have to go and then verify that it is reading that correctly, because you may have certain nuances to your contracts with each software vendor that means that the standard license for let's just pick 0365, because it's the standard 0365 E3 license. It doesn't apply to you because you've got a special caveat from Microsoft that says that you can have it the Office Professional Plus still running on the devices without any base licenses for the perpetual product. So it's a bit of an odd one. Within an external consultancy, obviously it depends on the data coming back into the SAM tool to get you to an effective license position. if the data from the vendor is accurate, going back to the last question, depending on the size of that data set, because if we're dealing with Microsoft for a 4,000 seat company and 700 devices, no, sorry, 700 servers, that won't be a day of doing a license position. That could be like 3 full days of making sure that the nuances of all the products have been metered out. So it's a bit of a difficult one. I think I've missed a part of that question, Marilyn.
Yeah, so the first part was, how do you find how convenient it is to confirm compliance?
Okay. So I suppose, Bob, it depends on the tooling and how you're getting it delivered. So from and how accurate the data is that's being input. If you have a SAM tool set that is working and you've verified that the data it's pulling back is correct, and you've put the license information in it, and it's just standard Microsoft ownership or anything, so there's no caveated agreements, no additional clauses, that within a SAM tool would be quite quick. It will give you normally a dashboard. From a consultant viewpoint, we're having to go through and ensure that everything's being captured, that we haven't missed anything from the business, and accurately reflect that within the document, and see where the risks and savings opportunities may sit within that, and provide that back. So that's one. I suppose that's one thing I should have mentioned in my thing, is that I'm able to provide that, and it's quite quick. 2 days isn't too much work, but 2-3 days able to then provide back an effective license position and identify where non-use is happening, give them all the actions to say, this is where we're at, but you can get rid of this risk by uninstalling it from these 300 devices that have never used it. So yeah, I think that covers that answer.
Yeah, great. So the next question we've got is from Ian Robinson. It says, has SAM become more complex with the increasing usage of corporate mobile smartphones and bring your own device?
Yes, definitively. Lots of companies haven't brought in full bring your own device policies, or they've got it mentioned saying you can bring your own device, but hasn't had any measurement against the SAM processes that may have been in place for a while, or they don't have any SAM processes and governance in place. So bring your own device has caused its own issues, because some licenses you're not allowed to utilize on personal devices. Then it's about how does that device connect into the network, which then has a number of other ones. Mobile devices, another one is how things like mobile device management tool sets are helping ensure that they remain corporate, because as we all know, what was a mobile phone like the Nokia 3210, where you couldn't put anything on it and it was just a mobile phone, not a problem. But now mobile phones are mini computers, which means that app stores, etc. If and users, I'll be quite honest, my husband's not a SAM person. He just clicks OK if it's for personal use. He's like, it doesn't matter, and I'm like, but you're using, you can't put that on a corporate device. It's like, oh no, I know you can't. And I'm like, right, okay, but everyone walking around with a phone will just accept, yeah, that's fine, I just need it for today. So managing that, and the technology changes, so moving to cloud, etc., where I was hearing the death knell of the SAM manager probably 18 months, two years ago, saying, oh, we don't need SAM because everything's moving to the cloud. Actually, it's probably more required now than it was, because these things can be hidden, and it needs pointing out where things can fall apart. Even I think Microsoft have just, Microsoft admitted that there's a problem with their M365 editions, which a technical person won't take any notice. Obviously, it's got no technical implication. It is purely about licensing and what's being activated. So an admin can just click a button in a portal and it gives access to all your users for something that you're not licensed for. So I think it's getting more and more complex, whereas it was previously, I just need to look at what's installed on a PC or a laptop or a server, is now, it moved to, virtual machines, and then people wanted virtual machines on their local devices. And then it's moved again to infrastructure as service, so you're having to have a look at failover rights and licensability rights, and also whether or not vendors allow you to run software in a virtual environment. There's still some out there that haven't changed their agreement terms. to now where we're at, where we've got hybrids and full cloud usage, the ability to install without any admin rights. So what was a gold standard for keeping everything locked down has disappeared. And the advent of user, and I mean this nicely, but user is king. I need it now and I need it delivering now. I'll just download it to my mobile phone, my iPad, my bring your own device, and I'm going to use it for corporate reasoning. It has become exceptionally more complicated, and it is around the process and governance and ensuring that everyone's educated that can make that a little bit easier to manage, not only for the SAM manager themselves, but for the business to see and have a transparent view of what's going on within their wider software, air quotes, estate. I think that one covers that one off.
Yeah, and we've got some of them come back, so we'll come back to them in a minute. But the next question here is from Imran. And Imran asks, he's recently become a software licensing, taken on that responsibility. Can you recommend any good resources on SAM for learning, for example, books, website, or courses?
How weird, I had all those books out earlier today. So I've got one, Kylie probably will know this one. There's a small book that became my Bible. It references the slightly outdated ISO for SAM. It's SAM Process Guidance. It's a little pocket book by Rory Canavan, a Kickstart Your SAM program, which was my Bible when I was starting out. Also, Practical ITAM is a good one by Martin Thompson. And resources, there's quite a lot of them on when you're looking for a website. I don't work for any of these, just so you know. It's just the ones that I found quite useful. So the ITAM review online, BCS I found quite useful. What else? There was another one. Oh, Licensing School. There's a website called Licensing School that provides quite some good ones out there. And then training courses, there's the SAM Essentials, as was, I don't know what's coming with V4, if there is anything to replace it, but it fell into ITIL V3. And CSAM and CHAMP from IA ITAM were ones that I've attended. But I think, for anyone starting out, I think it's literally always have a look at the Microsoft product use rights. I know that's very Microsoft centric, but it gives you an idea as to how quickly things can change.
Yeah, I've typed a few of those into the chat, so hopefully people will see those coming up on their screens as well. But just coming back to Vaughan, he's said thanks for your question and your answer to the first question. And since the Microsoft FT moved to subscription, some entitlement data does not appear in the MLS, and it creates more effort to get clear picture on engagement. So I think that was just sort of a clarification there.
Yeah. So there's quite a few places now that the MLS doesn't reflect, just to clarify for everyone else on the call. So MLS looks purely at your transaction data for things such as your enterprise agreement select plus open agreements. And then randomly within the MLS, there'll be a tab called MPSA. So if you have an MPSA agreement, your MPSA entitlement will show in there, but it's not part of your overall license summary. So you'd end up having to add that in. So I think that's what Vaughan was alluding to. And I've since found that things such as CSPs don't show in your MLS either, so you have to dig that data out. It is, as I said before, it is something that I know that Civica have asked, saying, why is this the case? Because it just makes it entirely more difficult to gather all that information into one place. But no, thanks for the clarification, Vaughan.
Yeah. And back to Bob Ray again. Thanks you again for the answer. And he says, have you come across IE.com App Clarity? Sadly, it's been made redundant from them, but their App Clarity.
Is it App Clarity? Was that?
Yeah, App Clarity.
Oh, hang on. I haven't. No, I was just good.
Yeah, it's IE.com App Clarity.
Do you know what? I have heard of it, but I would have to go and look at it to re-jog my memory on it. Bob, you could expand on that. It might just pop back into my head.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the next question then from John Dodds. John asks, how do you find interacting with senior leadership in the new role? Do they readily listen and take your advice?
Actually, they have. Thanks, John. So it's slightly different to working internally to a business where you're dealing with your own senior leadership for the SAM that you're providing internally, whereas within Civica, speaking to the senior leadership here has been really positive. So things where I've noticed don't necessarily match what I thought would be happening. I've been able to ask, my boss's boss, why that is, or I've suggested changes, and it's all been taken on board really, really readily, and not in any way been seen as, oh, the new person's coming in as said we're doing this incorrectly. It's been for me personally, it has been a breath of fresh air where that two-way conversations happening and things are being taken on board both ways. There's no, it doesn't feel like any battles, but I am only 5 months in.
And just coming back on Bob's question, he says 1e.com.
Oh, 1e.com.
That was my mistake the
Gosh,
way I read it.
it's okay, don't worry.
He says here,
Yeah.
really impressive as to how quickly it can be up and running for SAM solutions, i.e. within a week of installations.
So my question on that, because it's not something that I've come across often, and it's my first question as a SAM would be, have they if they're promoting themselves as a SAM toolset, or have they got the software recognition libraries behind it which would take the installation data and smash it together with your ownership data and provide you with a compliance position? Or is it very much like NextThink and SCCM, that it's really quick at pulling the data back in of installations, and then you've got to put that somewhere else, without me having to dig into 1e.com now? Yeah, but Bob, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'll have a look at it and let you know.
Cool. We've got a couple more questions, so just check that
Yeah,
you're all right for time.
I am, yes.
Okay, great. And obviously, people, if they have to drop off, they'll do so, I guess. But we've got
Yeah.
still quite a lot of people on listening. We've got another question here coming in from David Bickett. And David asks, what's the impact of ITAM, focus, workloads, budgets, etc.? Are you seeing resulting from COVID-19?
So I've spoken to a couple of my friends that are still internal SAMs, and they're obviously having to present to their businesses increases in spend that were not expected for things such as like RDS, Citrix, and then on top of that, the applications and the way those applications are being accessed. From a SAM consultant viewpoint, I have noticed that there's been a boom in the use of those remote working those ways of remote working, and we're having, if we were looking at ELPs that were carried out for the same companies 12 months ago, you can see that significant shift. I think at the very beginning of the COVID-19 situation, a lot of companies, I know that Citrix came out and said if you're already a Citrix company, they'll offer you rental licenses as opposed to making you buy them. So that was something that I made any company I knew that I was working with that had Citrix aware of, which means it's dropped their pricing that they were expecting to spend. But I haven't seen that sort of offer from Microsoft and others. So I don't think it's presently hitting budgets. Some people are making people aware, but I don't think it's hitting budgets. And my personal view is that there may be some kickback possibly in about 18 months' time where things should hopefully have settled down, and perhaps some more aggressive vendors may come out of the woodwork to double check that things have gone back to the status quo and things haven't been left. But that's my personal viewpoint. Maybe I'm a little bit cynical after years in some, but no, I'm seeing it, whether or not it's actually hitting my clients' budgets, or whether me informing them that they need to reduce those licenses, well, not licenses, reduce those installs to get them back into a correct state. but I am seeing that major step. There has been huge uplifts in ways of connecting in from home, and devices connecting in. So not only it being the corporately owned devices, but people have rapidly taken on the bring your own device, connect in from anywhere ways of working, which has been great for getting everyone up and running. But obviously, further down the line, someone needs to go back and revisit the way in which they're connecting to double check that that hasn't had a major impact on risk associated with SAM and the licenses associated.
Yeah, and the next question we've got here is from Stephen Williams. What are your aspirations in SAM consulting world, and what are you wanting to learn, like new skill sets, different vendor licensing, etc.?
I would really, I would really like to completely understand Oracle licensing from a licensing perspective. It's been one of the ones that it's been a bit of a dark art for all of the time that I've been a SAM. I understand it and can get around it, but I would like to really understand it and the nitty gritty of it, especially as they are pushing, as IBM, so IBM and Oracle are both pushing their hybrid solution sets and moving people into the cloud. I want to understand the impacts of that. IBM have brought some wonderful licensing in called flex points, which replaces the need for perpetual products, and so many flex points equals so many processor value units. So it just it is another dark art. So those are the two products that I'd really like to get to know. My consultant for the move to consultancy and what I want to get out of it, growing confidence, which from a personal and a professional viewpoint, able to impart knowledge to more people, and what else? And see how others operate, because I think sometimes as an internal SAM, you stay with the company for quite some time, you make a move, you get to know the next company, and literally it becomes quite similar. I think at one point, I think I described it as the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and over again and expect a different outcome, because everywhere you go, it's like, right, okay, start at the beginning, what's happening, how can we make that better, implement the processes, implement the governance, get everything up and running, and expect something to be slightly different at the end, and it's just not happening. But long term, I was speaking to my boss about it actually about 3 weeks ago. I want personally to go and do something like a part-time law degree, not so that I can become a lawyer necessarily, but for me to be able to actually be able to do the nitty-gritty of like contract negotiations internal to a business, and be able to get it right so that we're not having anything hidden, and perhaps go into IT law if I was to go to the bar, and if failing that, aim to be a CIO is where I'd like to go, having background knowledge in the technical elements, and moving forward is CIO for a company. Hope that answers it.
Yeah, fabulous. That is our last question there, but it's interesting, like as you've been
Okay.
talking, one of the things that popped up for me, or I recalled, I'm a consultant as well, so or contractor mainly, but often I go into companies, and it still surprises me, probably this far down the track where I've been involved in software asset management for years, that the maturity of some major companies is still quite low skilled, low level, or they're just introducing tools now. And obviously, things have changed, like with respect to a lot of cloud services now, but certainly there's still quite a lot of work to be done in the world of SAM for, most industries.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think there's something around SAM that it was a bit of a buzzword in the mid 2000s, and everyone was going for it, and then it kind of waned off, and it peaked again. Everyone knows they need it. Vendors are still auditing, and if you read the news recently, that PwC were saying to software vendors, "Oh, use us for auditing," and I was like, "Oh God, like this is going to be great." But no, it has. Yeah, I'm shocked at how many. Not necessarily that they're low down, but it's the fact that perhaps the knowledge isn't there. It seems that people sign off being the person responsible for it, CIOs in general, or CEOs. Those are the ones that could go to prison at the worst case. And you sat there going, you've signed off, but you're not. There's no one actually checking that it's been done for you. I find that really, I wouldn't want to go to prison, and I wouldn't want to be responsible for saying to a load of people that own the company, the shareholders, by the way, I need 2 million to cover off a license audit, or in the case of SAP, that's all gone very quiet, hasn't it, with Diageo, but they were wanting 220 million. I wouldn't want to be that person saying, oh, right, okay, sorry, that's just eaten the next. It is very odd how big companies, it just doesn't seem to be on their radar as much. And yeah, that's across the board.
Yeah, I know. So there's lots of opportunities there, I guess, in general. So
Yeah.
thank you very much, Louise, for your presentation and your time this evening. Obviously had quite a lot of people come on and got obviously a lot of value from the questions that we've received through this evening. So unfortunately, I can't really give you any gift like we normally do at the BCS for your
No,
presentation
it's
because we're
okay.
starting. So we do have a book library that you can choose a book from as well. So I'll send you some details around that. But certainly, thank you very much for running this session with me tonight.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone that's attended and still on the call. I know it's overrun by about 10 minutes, but no, thank you. It was great.
Cool. And just I've got the last page up there, and I will be closing the call now. But if anybody would like to reach out to Kylie Fowler on the email addresses that are there, we can take we can bring you into our group through our emailing distribution list and keep you up to date with everything. But certainly, if you would like to be a presenter like Louise did tonight, we're generally open to topics. We like lots of case studies, or our members like case studies of things that you've experienced in your workplaces where you've worked. To help other people in implementation wise or anything like that, please do drop an email to Kylie or get in touch with any of us via our LinkedIn group. And reach out to us. We will be putting some information out on LinkedIn about how you can reach out to us to request to be a presenter for our October webinar conference. But that's it for this evening. So delighted that we had a great session here, and thank you all very much.
Thank you.